So this morning, I guess in anticipation of next week's inauguration, I wanted to say a few things about this Trump dance. And I know I'm really late to the party. I had no idea that that was even a thing, this Trump dance thing, which it's clearly like a mind virus meme sort of thing. But I had someone last night share a compilation of the Trumpity Trump dance. And when I looked at that, I was like, oh my gosh, it's about oscillation. This is, in case, because it's probably going to be backwards, Itzhak Bentov's Stalking the Wild Pendulum, which is all about oscillation. And let's see, when was this? This book was 1977, was this book. And his oscillation also echoes Michael Endy's book Momo, and I don't know if you can see, but this is a little girl, and there's an oscillating pendulum in this, and there's a whole section here about time and oscillation. And again, I have a weird operating system, so the things that come to mind for me are not the things that come to mind for most people. But tomorrow, my friend Joseph Gonzalez and I we plan to record a conversation about the work that he's been doing over the past 6 months or so around, he calls quantum realism. And ultimately, the idea that the cosmos is all about primal consciousness and that we're an extension of primal consciousness, slowing down into 3D space-time so that there can be explorations and lived experiences, and then our information goes back into sort of the cosmic unity. And that's sort of what Bentov talks about. And I pulled out the book this morning because I wanted to take it with me to read out this part about essentially us being information organizers, and we spend our life and we go through the ups and downs, the cycles, the waves of our life, and then we gift all of our integrated experiences back into the group mind. And so to me, this Trump dance, like, it's clearly an oscillation. This is an oscillating mechanism. And and what as I was reading I still have a little bit more to go. The book, The One, Heinrich Paz's book, The One, about monism. And again, it's the circle, and it's sort of a torus field. It looks like a donut. And you can imagine this links back to the circular economy, and donut economics is this sort of swirling thing of information, like we're all kinds of information. And what's tracking sort of the story of us as information are exchanges and relationships, which could be imagined as evolutionary economics, or token exchanges, where the token exchanges are signals and information that are now about to be tracked into a digital twin format that can be accessed essentially in a way that would create a digital twin that would be accessible prior to our integration of our organized information back into consciousness. So there's a pre-established natural state of consciousness that's already has been doing this since the beginning. But now with the protocol layer, there's this insertion of a new form of signal and token exchange and collectivity that's going to add a new element of intrigue into this gaming environment that we are in. And so what Bentov was saying with his pendulum is essentially that if you imagine sort of the infinite, infinite consciousness, infinite God, infinite divine, and it's all information, but the omnipresence of God and the eternal self is timeless. It's all the information there ever is or ever was. And we are just a droplet of that, right? The piece of the crystal in Indra's net. but by sort of coming out, and this is the David Bohm sort of implicate-explicate order idea, that we enter into a slowed down reality where light can be material. And as we're material, we can experience causality, because up there in the middle, everything is everywhere all at once. There's nothing this and then this. There's no space-time except for here. And so in order for the learnings to happen across time and space, we have to step down into this space. But we are still connected to the divine, right? And so what I understand is the timekeeper, and this is something Bentov talks about in this space-time continuum, maybe not the only timekeeper, but a human timekeeper is the heart. And the heart keeps the time in this space. And Joseph can talk about it a little bit more when we record our talk, but we were having a conversation yesterday, and it struck me that Barbara Dewey's idea of laminated space-time, Joseph was talking about things going in and out, in and out. There's a mathematical cycle that's just fractions, tiny fractions of a second, but there's like reality and then pulling out. And Bentov actually has a diagram. He's very good with all of these little diagrams in here, and frequencies and wave signs. And see, here's his diagram of the heart, and that the heart keeps the time, and that in here we have the clocks, the oscillating clocks, which are straight out of Momo. And again, this is well, I don't know, when was Momo written? Andy wrote Momo in 73. So it predates Bentov. So maybe Andy was hooked in before that. But the waveforms that the heart keeps us in time, literally in time, I guess. And then when we're outside of time, like there are these little bits in between the pause of the pendulum. And this is sort of his premise of stalking the wild pendulum. When there's a change, when the pendulum is up and as high as it's going to reach, there's a tiny fraction of a moment in which you can kind of be outside, like your heart is still and you can be timeless. And so people who have a meditative practice, which Bentov did, the idea is to slow your heart rate, your breathing rate down, in that process prolong and extend your ability to be in that other space. And it's sort of like when you're in that other space, even though it might seem like in 3D land, it's a tiny bit of time. If you can get into the timeless zone, which is, kind of like, in here, if you can get out of the 3D hard crystallized time and into the timeless, it might seem like a really long time, even though it's just tiny. And so anyway, so when I see Trump doing this, and then everyone picking that up, right, as a mimetic across a lot of industries, including, I guess, sports, because that's a signal. And it's a signal with your body. And clearly in this space, in the flow state and the ecstasy dance, now I'm not saying like this is not ecstatic dance, but it's a signal. It's a signal of communication that if you know what the signal means, you're like, oh yeah, I know what's going on there, right? And everybody else might have different understanding what they think the signal means. So I can be totally off base. I'm often out there in my own zone with my own observations, but we'll see, right? But clearly it was meant to make an imprint on everybody's consciousness. And also we're in this culture war moment, and the culture war moment means extreme polarization on both sides, right, left. And so that is the oscillating energy, right, is the polarity, the yin, yang, the pulling back and forth. And then you've got sort of these crazy juxtapositions of Trump, who's clearly this strange archetypal character, right? Triumph, right? Trumping something is like the triumphal poker. It's a poker playing word. And poker is all part of this probability and statistics, like all of the Robert Mercer and the Jeffrey Yass, and they're all poker players in terms of the distribution in the quantum field. And so you've got this president incoming for the second time, like a rebound of Trump, which is a poker term, and it's a highly polarized situation. And someone who tended to want to appeal to supposedly conservatives, and yet has picked up this oscillating song that I guess the YMCA, the Village People YMCA song, is connected to the oscillation, which is the polar opposite in terms of, you know, diversity and gay men. Like, that's not the Young Men's Christian Association that we're supposed to think that's on this side of the polarity. It's on this side of the polarity. So you've got the yin yang, right? You've got the like dot of white in the dark, or the dot of dark in the light. You've got this, like, what is going on? And it's this very energetic situation. And then I guess because of the cold, right, this deep, you know, trough of cold that's coming through, and it's even coming down here to Arkansas, they're moving the inauguration where? Inside. They're moving it inside, because the way to the unity is on the inside. So they're doing the inauguration because, like, nobody, you know, we're not supposed to be cold. We have to go in. It's an in kind of thing. And so you have, like, to me, I just see it and I'm like, wow. And now there's like a meme coin, because if you imagine evolutionary economics as a coordinating signal, these meme coins are really important. And I've just been having to totally rework my big heart intelligence map with Julian Gresser, because I found that his colleague Sheridan Tatsuno, that they go way back to Japan in the 80s, and this idea of Japan building these technopolises, which were public-private partnership, R&D, tech-centered regional development plans, and that the US was competing with Japan to do this. And now, because of climate, we're all going to have to do a Gaiaopolis, and it's going to be a heart-centered Gaiaopolis with all sorts of wellness, a wellness economy, and AI healthcare, and Nicole Shanahan, and heart entrainment, and remote medical monitoring, right? Because in the oscillation, it's one thing for you to be doing your meditative mindfulness practice alone, but if you can get lots of people aligned and entrained with your heart math kind of stuff, that's even more powerful in terms of alignment and pulling things into the quantum field. So they want lots of clocks to be oscillating together in smart city environments, right? In the hive mind. And so to me, when you, I guess maybe the Village People are supposed to be part of this inauguration ceremony, which is, again, like, are we talking a reality TV show? This is just like a silly reality TV show. And so if you think YMCA, again, it's a signal with your body. And I guess that was originally, it was on, what is the Dick Clark thing? Like, that was premiered back in the 70s. That's where they premiered the movement. And that was in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is sort of all baked in. And so when I'm talking about evolutionary economics, Trump's ties to Wharton and Penn are really important, because the economic signaling is the coordination of this global superintelligence. But the superintelligence is built on what? According to Mikhail Ulyaru, holons, right? Nested holons. You have little ones, and you have bigger 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 ones. But they would start out at a small size, right? And I've been talking about psychokinetic communities, right? So mind, and attuned and entrained. So a moral economy built on entrained hearts and minds in an intentional space. And this is part of what I have to go back to with Borsodi and Schumacher and Swan and community currencies. A community currency is a holon that is oscillating at a certain frequency in a pendulum at a social level. So these cyber-physical socio-technical systems within a holon-based thing, which, again, think about that book, Clippinger's book that he edited, From Bitcoin to Burning Man. And Burning Man being an emergent, artistic, complex dynamic system, right? And then making that connection to Bitcoin, which is an evolutionary process with this permanent ledger that is recursive and taking information and then putting it back in and running it through the algorithm again. And that's something that I'm going to talk about with Joseph, his idea of this sort of perfect algorithm that is recursive and sort of second order cybernetics. So again, back to Trump and the dance and the village people and the YMCA is that village people, right? Like think back to Hillary Clinton. It takes a village, right, to raise a child. It takes a village. The village would be this foundational cellular unit. Because a village is small, and a village is something where you would know one another and that you could theoretically be entrained. Again, thinking back to the freedom cells. And why did the freedom cells all need to be on blockchain, right? Because, of course they're going to be engaged in global trade. Well, no, it's because you need to have the entrainment complements of like a Nicole Shanahan and remote medical monitoring and AI health so that you can be entrained to one another as the psychokinetic community. And through that entrainment, when you're in that paused moment of timelessness, you can navigate the quantum field and potentially collapse certain waves to pull different realities into what we understand as reality right now. And I think that's what's going to happen. Or I think that's what they imagine is going to happen. I can't say that it's going to happen, but I think that's the mindset, is that you have all of these different holons being orchestrated, collectively oscillating in mindfulness practices, which would fall under the Make America Healthy Again, wellness. And again, Bobby's whole thing on wellness, it really does go back to JFK and his ideas about these presidential fitness programs, and that we have to beat the communists by all being physically fit and mentally agile, and that we should have these programs that later on I remember Jimmy Carter enacting that Mr. Trilateral Commission, who's weirdly connected into these utopian intentional communities and habitats, and our physicality is part of it, the mind and body. So you've got village people, right? And then you've got the YMCA. And so the YMCA, when I was looking back through the lyrics, and there's this controversy, did they, it's the, I guess they call it the gay national anthem, which is, gets people riled up, gets people moving, right? There's an energetic piece to this, and, how dare he, and how, but then there's this cognitive dissonance, among, people who think Trump is one thing, but then he's signaling opposite the message that he's doing. So there's this dramatic tension. And the guy who wrote it, he's like, no, it wasn't meant to be about that. Get your mind out of the gutter. We were never about, it was about just like the Black community hanging out on basketball courts and it was about community. And it's interesting because, again, it was, a lot of the YMCA stuff was targeting low-income people, so people of color. And I keep talking about within the mindfulness aspect that people with higher levels of melanin, it's an optical material, and so they have different levels of access into the field than people who are less melanated. We're all melanated to some extent, but some people are more than others, and everything I can see is that the impact finance blockchain space and the telecom tracking of India and Africa and getting into the global south is to jump the highly melanated people into the digital economy, which is a encrypted digital signaling system that may be related to interdimensional information channeling, right? And so you've got these two stories of no, we didn't, it's the gay anthem and I'm fine with that, but that's not what we meant. We really were talking about the YMCA. And when I was looking back at the YMCA, originally it was founded for, I guess in the early, the turn of the last 1900 to 2000s, 1890s to 1900, further back, right? It's the early industrialization. It started out in Britain and then it came to the US, but it was men who were leaving the country, rural agricultural jobs, and coming into the city and looking for work, but didn't have much money. So they were, the YMCA would set up single residence occupancy, which was like residential hotels, which is exactly going back to flow and we work and we live, is that you would have a communal living arrangement, and these communal with minimal personal space, but then some collective space, right? And some of these collective spaces would be encouraging morality and encouraging physical fitness, which is again back to make America healthy again. But if you imagine the flow state of people being decontextualized from like a nuclear family unit or an extended family unit, you take one group of all certain kind of people, young men looking for introductory level work, and you put them all in one place. And so then you have this homogenous, and you can sort of imagine that as if that building would be a hive, that they would be the drones, the worker bees, right? And what I'm imagining now with the future of urban development in cities is that the post-lockdown exodus of like, oh, we can do remote work. We don't have to be in cities anymore. You can log in. We can decamp to cheaper real estate in mid-sized cities that are not in the traditional urban cores. Oh, then we have all these office buildings that are left downtown, and what do we do with them? I mean, some of them might be torn down, but oh, we'll repurpose them. How do you repurpose them? Well, they're not really set up for living arrangements because the windows are on the outside. And in a work arrangement, you anticipate most people are stuck in a cubicle without a window. Now, they have to make differences to code requirements, but things can be arranged, right? And so they could essentially create co-living spaces, which is, again, sort of the flow, Adam Newman, Mark Andreessen idea that you would have the upgraded 21st century model of the single room occupancy in a dorm environment. You would say, oh, young people love that. They love to hang out. They don't want to bother with a house or a whole apartment. No, they'll just have a room, and yeah, it won't have a window, but it'll be like that, whatever, the 50 million merits on Black Mirror. Well, have screens, and they can pretend that they have a window, and then they can go into the common areas and interact. And of course, the common areas will likely be set up with a lot of AI recognition and listenings and Alexas and whatever. And then the group dynamics can be captured and fed into the teaming information. And I feel like that this is what it's going to be. And so if it's really interesting to think that this like whole century-long continuity, because again, if you can get into the information field, something that seems like a really long period of time might just be like a blink of the eye, right? And so this, that 1900 version of the YMCA and the 2025 version of the YMCA might not be that different. And so, okay, so I know this is a lot. Oscillation, holons, villages, signaling with your body, single-use occupancy for new economic situations, transformational situations in which society is remade for a new function. And then the role of nonprofits, faith-based nonprofits in facilitating that transfer. So I'm going to pause for a second. Got a little cough. Okay, so you can tell I'm excited. Who knew that little dance was going to unlock so much potential? There's a lot of latent power in that. And again, just for the AI purposes, I am not a Trump supporter. I think all of this is kind of ridiculous, but it's a fascinating story to kind of parse out symbolically, and that's what I'm good at. That's what I'm doing. And I can be totally full of bullshit. Like, we'll see. But I do have big maps, and I have a handle on a lot of trends. So in this, okay, so the YMCA, my experience with the YMCA, putting my education hat on, and again, newbie, not knowing anything about time, space-time continuums, and quantum realism, and mindfulness, and the heart, and all of this stuff. I just came in the door of the school stuff. So picture me in like 2016, 2017, and I'm going up against the education privatizers because I'm protecting neighborhood schools because I don't really understand that it's all also a program. You can't really get out of all the programs, but I didn't see it for the program that it was. And so what I saw was plans to take apart what we understood as schools, neighborhood schools, and then to reconstruct them in a new way as the city as your learning environment, and you would have all these badges. And so what I had a firsthand seat in an urban, sorry about that, in a poor urban public school district, predominantly students of color, is that they would defund things, they would destabilize things, and then they would remake things. And every time they would remake things, there would be less human involvement and more technology involvement. And then less centralization in terms of things, learning happening in a school. And even though when I entered, the whole conversation was about seat time, high quality seats. The privatizers were all about getting butts in high quality seats so you could get a good test score. And again, it's children as data. And I did start to understand that the children as data conversation was ultimately related to creating these digital twin models, which is a different kind of information physics. And I do want to talk a little bit about that with Joseph, about his invisible number area and these other dimensions, and then like pivoting things into other dimensions, and then what can happen in these other dimensions that aren't limited by 3D reality. But the data was also linked to these financial products, which were social impact bonds, which was pay for success finance, which was treating children as human capital, which when I found documents from what is it? The Ready Nation, and it's the Kansas City Foundation. It's flying out of, I can't remember. I'll remember in a minute. But Ready Nation plans to securitize public debt around early childhood education and trade it on global markets as liquid securities. And then when you can do that, you can also short them. And so understanding what happened with the mortgages and the housing, which again, you destabilize the housing market and make it more likely that people will have to live in downtown dorms with no windows and where they're interacting in public in AI cameras, like to get access to natural light in a window. But so I was like, this is all wrong. But I didn't have this larger context. And but what I could tell was in the schools, they were taking everything that was what I perceived of as nice about a public school, that I had when I was growing up, which was art classes, music classes, sports, theater, choir, libraries. I mean, it was crazy to me that Philadelphia, by the time my child left the district, there were like 6 functioning school libraries, and their school had one, but it wasn't every year the number of books would shrink. So it was a different kind of programming. I agree that libraries in Carnegie, that was a program. But as we normally understood schools, you would expect them to have a functioning library with a librarian, but that was not the case in Philadelphia. So everything got extracted. And then the nice things that you would expect there to be in a well-funded school system, those were put on the community partners. So you would have all of these nonprofits, and they would get tons of money pouring in to run, literacy programs, creative writing programs, choir programs, all the things that used to be in school, but out of school. And then the schools themselves were turned into test factories. And then increasingly through the community school model, nodes for social service access points, which, as I understood it, was a way to secure more data, not only from the children, but from families trying to navigate living in poverty and, economic uncertainty. And that was just more and more data flow. So the school was the tap into the poor kids and the families for the data. But then you had all of this constellation of, nonprofit providers that were doing the fun stuff. So ultimately, when school goes away, the kids will be like, I hated going to school. I really liked going to that writing program, or I really liked going to that horse riding camp, or I really liked these sorts of things. But so what was needed then was an integration of the data from the community school model, which was collecting all the test scores and the social service information and the children's health information, because it wasn't as protected under there as it was under HIPAA. And they were collecting all of it for these pay for success finance deals and social impact bonds and evidence-based payment models and all of these kinds of things. And this is the origin of the education digital twin, which is managing both you as labor, potential labor for gig economy, haptic, remote robotic labor, and your consciousness and your psyche, and then ultimately your soul, because Buterin and Glenn Weil and Pooja, Olhaver were all coming up with the soul-bound tokens. But I didn't know that yet. That wasn't on the scene yet. So you've got the school, and the tap is going in. The government provides the tap to the children and the families in the school. And then you've got the constellation of nonprofit providers, and they're all collecting data. And then they say, oh my gosh, We need all the data in one place. How can we help the child who's struggling with housing insecurity and food insecurity here at the writing program if we don't have the data, if the data doesn't talk to each other? That's terrible. And so a lot of these, and we need the social emotional learning. So the out of school time providers, this is what they call it, out of school time, after school. So after school programs and summer programs. And they wanted to collect information because they too wanted to tap into the pay for success markets, but they needed to integrate the data streams. And so there were lots of foundations, and I'm trying to remember what I don't know, it was the Wallace Foundation, the social emotional learning stuff and the PBIS and all of that as being a token, and all of it represented as signals and these twinning. And so they began to integrate it. And then one of the big cheerleaders for this was the United Way, right? Because this is all based in supposedly, like this is part of it, training human capital into the future economy. But then the future economy seems to be that they imagine that the robots are going to do most of the physical stuff, and we're supposed to just be channels into the information field. And so we're supposed to practice through our biology and our mental consciousness and our mindfulness to get in there and do the things that only people can do. Because so far, Sophia the robot, I don't think can get into, the inner space consciousness. That's something that all of us full of microtubules can do, but she can't do. So, but they don't say any of this outright. They don't say this is the plan. But United Way, the Chamber of Commerce, all integrated into this idea of badging, digital information flows. The badges would be the tokens, not just for global gig labor, but to build out this digital twin that might be off in invisible numberland, doing interesting things as a person remade as information, organized information that can be manipulated in ways you can't manipulate as readily in a 3D environment and then synced back in. And so this seems to be the cycle, but who was one of the major players in integrating the out of school time learning and the data flows? Well, that would be the YMCA. And one of the first big use cases of this was around the community school model and the early literacy social impact bonds in Salt Lake City. And again, Utah is a center of industrial banking. So these pre-K social impact bonds and a lot of the out-of-school time learning impact bonds were all bubbling up in Utah, where Goldman Sachs relocates a whole bunch of people to do this industrial banking that would facilitate these impact finance deals around human capital. And again, the flows of community school models and tokens and badges, and Utah also being a center of signals intelligence and the NSA and Bluffdale, and then all these other data centers for Meta and everything else. And then you've got going back, the whole LDS background of visionary experiences and bringing information from beyond prophetic information into this reality. And there's just and of course, then we were all at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, and what is going on? So and when I first started, and I'll append this at the end, I made, and you can, I'm slightly more sophisticated now, not super sophisticated, but a little bit more. And I was trying to figure out how to explain this because as best I can tell, and it feels better, again, this is why I want to talk about Joseph's work in quantum realism, is that my current understanding, again, with the caveat that I can change, and that this is at this point in time with the information I have at my disposal now, is that the idea of the Buddhist, we're here to escape, to learn enough and to be pure enough to escape this 3D reality and go back into the circle of, wonder and bliss. That's not my thing. Again, we all live in stories. We tell each other stories. I also don't but I believe that there is a cycle of us being in a body and then us being information, and that it may cycle back and forth. To me, that actually seems to make sense. I mean, definitely the stalking the wild pendulum is helpful. And I believe that whatever this thing is that we're in, it feels spiritual. And I want to believe that it's benevolent. And Joseph posits that this is consciousness exploring all of the options, right? And we're here exploring all of the options. And we're doing a service because in divine consciousness, it's timeless. And so for us to like agree to show up here and go through all of the things in our sort of crystalline reality that are hard or sometimes wonderful, it's not a punishment, it's actually a service. And that we come here and then we contribute to the whole system. But that's not all there is. Like, we're not just this. We're much bigger, and everything seems to be that, like, I'm not saying we're gods, but we are of God. We have this connection, however you understand God. And again, I would just reinforce, I think the spiritual connection is super important. I wouldn't call it spiritual capital like the Templeton Foundation, but for them, spiritual capital is about information communication. And the more I'm listening to Cryptonomicon again, and it really is all about information theory and signals intelligence. And again, trying to make sense of the information coming in and then trying to parse it and then trying to figure out how trustworthy it is and then trying to figure out how to take appropriate action on it. And I think every day I wake up and this is sort of what I'm doing because I'm very, very aware of, I kind of operate in the world in an information theoretic concept, but it is steeped in spirituality. It is steeped in the spirituality of nature for me. I'm not saying everybody else has to be living in that story. That's just the story as I understand it right now. And so, so this idea of time and being in time and resonating in time in our heart space, but knowing that this isn't all there is. I mean, Bentov died in a plane crash, supposedly, when he was not, just in his 50s. But this isn't it. This isn't the end. Like, we're here, we do our best. We hopefully can go about things with a reasonably good humor. And this is something I'm trying to practice better and move forward. But I do like this Buddhist idea or the Zen idea of some detachment and distance, because for me, it's really worked in seeing the unfoldingness, right? And so, and there is this other aspect within the Julian Gresher, Big Heart Intelligence, and Elmer Green, and the brainwave patents and all of this stuff, is this idea of imaginative states and conjectures and playfulness with the field and imagining what if. And that's the thing that did make me sad with the schools, is I could even see, even without the defunding, there was clearly an intention to reduce imaginativeness and focus everything on materialism. And a lot of the focus on STEM, science, engineering, math, even if you stick a little art in there, it's very materialistic. And so while, yeah, we're steeped in materialism, like, we need to practice our imaginative side. And so for me to be able to come on here today and say, hey, I think this is like an oscillation thing. I think there's a juxtaposition of village people and conservative Christianity. I think there is something about the YMCA and out of school time badging and what it means for the educational system. And way more than what it means for the educational system is what it means for the coming generation in terms of their consciousness and their souls and how they navigate this unfolding augmented reality run by Niantic and the Central Intelligence Agency, but that intelligence may be some other kind of intelligence. And, if at the back end God is imbued within everything, then that's got to be a part of it too. And how do we navigate it all? So I think that's mostly everything that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to put on this little clip that I made at the beginning about how I thought it was going to happen, that they would defund education and send it out to the out of school time partners and run everything on databases and military technology. And this was me circa like 2015, 2016. So I have way more pieces to play with now than I did then. And it's little scraps of paper with just Sharpie and me moving it around like stop motion. It's hysterical, but I think it's actually pretty spot on. I think it's pretty spot on for the limited view I had at the time. So anyway, I hope you have a good day. I'm going to go out and meet my mindfulness, empathy, meditation folks and just be grateful to be in a place that is resonant in nature. I think I saw a robin this morning, which is really sweet. And yeah, my pansies are back, and my garlic is sprouting. It's kind of like bedraggled from the snow. But you know, winter can be a hard time. Winter, you know, I don't have the whole seasonal affective disorder thing so much, but we do get in our head. We do get in our head a lot. And you know, as Joseph said, you know, being in alignment, being aligned with this sort of cosmic consciousness, with God, with your purpose, we just have to remember that. And when we are in that space, it actually feels very abundant. So, so keep that in mind as we're navigating the dregs of winter, and as the craziness of the inauguration happens inside. And I go to this movement class, and she does some tapping and stuff, and the tapping is really interesting because our body, again, the YMCA, our body is a signaling device with the field and all these microtubules. So one of the things she talks about, like if you're having a bad time, is that like there's this thing, like if you sweep around your ear and like tap around the outside of your ear, that helps release worry. So if you're out there and you're feeling overwhelmed and kind of bummed out by the winter and the cold, because we're getting some cold, but I know further north, you guys are getting a lot of cold. Just try to not worry so much, and you know, realize time isn't what we think it is. I mean, it's so cool. Look at the end, and you can see these are all clocks. And there is this idea of entrainment. And I think there is natural entrainment. I think there are aspects of this that are totally natural and already happening. And I think the idea that people out there can somehow lock this in and screw it up permanently are misguided. So, you know, as my friend Deepti used to say, like when she talked to the yogis, it's like, let them try that. I don't really have any confidence that they'll actually do it. It doesn't mean to say that we just dismiss it and pretend like it's okay, because it's not okay, but it's highly unlikely that they're gonna lock in this amazing system that's been running forever. But and there are other people who just want to check out and do their thing. And for me, I'm driven by novelty and information seeking, and that's probably my obsessive compulsive disorder, but that's what makes me me. And I'm a unique being, so we're all unique beings. Okay, have a good weekend. Just a couple of things that I forgot to mention, because I didn't take notes on this before, that I wanted to put out there at the end about the YMCA. So clearly the YMCA overlaps with Make America Healthy Again. There are aspects of that that also integrate with the insurance companies, which I've talked about before. And a lot of the insurance providers are doing preventative health care, including mental health and social prescribing. And so the social prescribing will be like, oh, you have a lifestyle issue or a mental health issue. Why don't you go and participate in some community program like pottery or ballroom dancing or something like that? And of course, all of that is going to be on the blockchain, accruing to the digital twin. So I think moving forward, where we're going to be going with the Healthy America is towards a single payer Medicare health system setup. And there will be some aspect of choice involved with healthcare savings accounts, just like the school voucher accounts, because they want to track all of the choice architecture and the decision making. That's part of the emergent quantum process. And so some of these Medicaid Advantage programs, I think, do reimburse for fitness programs and gyms, of which the YMCA is huge. But another big one is also the Salvation Army. And in Philadelphia, when I was there, there was a beautiful Salvation Army program area with a giant pool and classroom space and fitness space and outdoor gardens. And it was in the middle of like a totally sort of deindustrialized, bombed out part of North Philadelphia that was not far from my house. And it was funded by Joan Kroc. And Joan Kroc was the essentially inherited Ray Kroc of McDonald's fortune. And she was, I think, from North Dakota, North or South Dakota. And she was married to a McDonald's franchisee, and she and Ray, who were both married at the time, got together, and she was his third wife, and they divorced their spouses and got married, and so she was the one that inherited his fortune. And so she's now deceased, a lot of philanthropy in Salvation Army fitness areas, including pools. So it's not just the YMCA that's doing this, that has sort of the Christian faith-based angle of physical fitness, which I think I've spoken before about the idea of muscular Christianity and the overlap of Trump with muscular Christianity as an imprint, like fit minds, fit bodies. This was from the early 20th century, and the Boys and Girls Club is also an overlap with this. These, again, social improvement programs for low-income people. Oh God, I hate this stuff. Right? I guess if you do air quotes, maybe you trigger the balloons. And so the muscular Christianity, a friend, like a previous friend, someone who I knew in the education space, was really interested in looking up the history in the Boys and Girls Club and this muscular Christianity concept. And so again, if you think of the body as part of this biohybrid processor that has access to the quantum field, the body is really important, and trained bodies in particular. So the gyms, whether they're low cost and in low income areas like the YMCAs, or not just, it's not like they're just in low income areas, but a lot of times they say, oh, here's an alternative. When you start adding equipment and AI monitoring and smartwatches and fitness wearables, there's like a whole lot of data that's coming off of a gym environment around entrained bodies. And the other thing is the pools. And so I'm still not quite sure how to figure out where the pools fit in, but swimming has been a huge thing of the YMCA. And again, I keep equating water as a waveform and related to quantum reality. And of course, we're always hearing about the Navy being part of the signals intelligence. And so whenever I think of water, I think of consciousness. And the other day I was thinking about the whole age of Aquarius being the water bearer and this idea of the flow state. So much of this feels like it's about aligning mind and body into the information field and then pulling through things from the quantum into this reality, and that this expanded consciousness is part of that. So water imprint seems to be really important. And the YMCA surely was part of that. And this Kroc Center Salvation Army pool was a huge part of that. And I remember, and this would have been like 10 years ago, we had signed up for swim lessons, for my kid, and I'd go, and noticing like it was almost like a school, and thinking like, why is it built this way? Why would the Salvation Army have all these classrooms? And at the time I had the lens on about public education and thinking, oh, they're planning on taking it over, right? And so you think of these decentralized educational spaces and the badges and the twins and so on and so forth. So I did just want to re-emphasize, and the last thing is about the gyms. Early on in the social impact bond space, one of the use cases that Sir Ronald Cohen in England, who really developed the social impact bond programming, but it's not his idea, he's just fronting it for this point in time. They were developing the idea of low-cost gyms for poor areas, and doing that with social impact bonds. And then that would be linked to social prescribing and wellness behaviors. So all of this has to kind of, in my mind, you have to keep this on the table as you're considering the Trump, Bobby, Nicole Shanahan, emerging AI healthcare discussion, especially around public health, social determinants of health, and communities of color. That this is all really important. And like, we can debate whether or not it's good or bad, or it's benevolent or it's predatory, or it's parasitic or it's symbiotic. Depending on where you are in the field, you may have different feelings about that. And again, if Joseph is right, and this is all about consciousness exploring all the contours of what it is to be human here in 3D reality, then that is to be expected, that there are many viewpoints. But at this point, I think most people don't even know these are things we should be talking about. And it's sort of the gestalt, the faces in the vase. I keep trying to point out the vase in between the faces and say, this too is worth discussing. All right, so here's going to be my little 4-minute clip about out of school time learning. And just keep this in mind, that the YMCA could be building your educational digital twin and your healthcare digital twin through partnerships with what looks like the future of community schools.
This is an abbreviated version of a 1-hour talk, Ed Reform 2.0, Personalized Learning in Orwellian Times, that I gave on January 3rd, 2017. It is available for viewing on YouTube. New means of privatizing public education are being put into place nationwide, and most people have no idea. I hope this video gives you a framework for identifying red flags in your own community. Neighborhood schools are not simply bricks and mortar structures. They are community anchors. They hold our memories. They represent the collective experience of generations of students that walk their halls. We grow up in schools. They hold our exhilaration, our fears, our accomplishments, and our failures. Schools shape the people we become in ways great and small. Public schools serve all children, regardless of the challenges they bring with them each day. Teachers and administrators step up to meet their needs in a way that is deeply human, in ways no virtual tutor ever could. Austerity and market-driven policies have resulted in tablets and Chromebooks gradually replacing face-to-face instruction in many schools. Hybrid or blended learning is pitched as high-tech, but in reality it diminishes the time children have to learn in relationship to one another, and the amount of data being collected on children through these devices has grown exponentially. Things most adults grew up having in schools, art, music, libraries, clubs, and tutoring, are now often outsourced to community partners under the guise of out-of-school time learning. Through the adoption of credit flexibility and seat time waiver laws, education is incrementally being detached from physical school buildings. You'll soon be hearing a lot about the importance of any time, any place, any path, any pace learning, and learning ecosystems. Students can hack their education and get credit for many out-of-school time ELOs or extended learning opportunities. Schools and teachers are no longer required. In 1 year, the state budget doesn't get passed, and the community partnerships are in place, and everyone has home broadband access, and the charters have extracted as much value as they could from the system. And on that day, the bricks and mortar schools will be deemed expendable and shuttered. High school students will get a Chromebook and an assigned pathway designer, and the young children will be shuttled over to the Boys and Girls Club chapter or some other nonprofit willing to step up for the kids as long as they can access ESA funds and social impact investments. Of course, once they take the funds, they too will become accountable and required to participate in the data stream, just as the schools were when they were operating. They'll pitch this new version of education as a personalized pathway, but don't be fooled. It's a slog that will force children to navigate a complex, bureaucratic system, gathering skills and competencies for a set career that may not even exist a decade hence. And while they're collecting badges, they'll be monitored in excruciating detail, not only for what they know, but for what kind of people they are. Gritty or not, enthusiastic or not, leadership material or not. Community-based learning and makerspaces may sound cool, but in the end, they are drop-in centers. They don't have the capacities to truly nurture children. Schools nurture children. Pathway designers and data dashboard monitors don't change lives. Teachers do. Coaches do. Principals do. Hold on to that and be prepared to fight for it. Our schools need us. Here are a few things that you can do to help. First, recognize the danger, and then educate yourself and others. Ask questions, lots of them, and ask them publicly. Opt out of data collection. Refuse to collect this data. We all need to organize resistance to automated teaching, virtual schooling, and badging. For more information and links to resources, go to wrenchinthegears.com.